Good morning. This is March 16, 2020. I'm reporting from East Coast of the United States for those of you who are in different time zones. So let's look at some of these data in the US here and see what's going on and why some people are antsy to reopen as soon as possible. Well, I calculated the mortality rate. So mortality rate, you take the deaths and you divide it by the population mid-year. Now, we don't really have mid-year yet. I would have to basically divide it by the population mid-time point from when we started recording deaths from the coronavirus, but this is the best I got here. And then I multiplied by 100,000 to calculate the number of deaths per 100,000 individuals. So the deaths per 100,000 are pretty high in Connecticut, Michigan, New Jersey, and New York. New York being 143 individuals per 100,000, and they're pretty low in, say, Texas, which is like 4.36 per 100,000. In Florida, we got about 8 or so people per 100,000, 9 maybe. And so this is what we should be using to inform our decision. So if we think about what's the probability of dying, but except for we're multiplying by 100,000 instead of 100 here. And in the US, it's 26 per 100,000 population in total. So it's a lot, higher in some of these areas. Well, that's actually an interesting point, because we look at the confirmed cases. So confirmed cases are those who tested positive. If we can trust the test, I have issues with testing, of course, because we have to account for the sensitivity and specificity of the test. In other words, its validity. But this is the best we can do. So in terms of those who are confirmed, New York City has 24% of all. So this is the number of confirmed cases in New York divided by the number of confirmed cases in the US. This was done today, and this is using the Johns Hopkins website, which gathers data from CDC and all these other bureaus. So it's the best possible data we have, and it's done every day. And if you put New York and New Jersey together, we have 34% of all cases. Imagine, that's a small region, right? And so it's a very small region in the U.S. You're getting a large proportion of the cases here. In terms of deaths, those two states alone account for 43% of all deaths. And if you had Connecticut in there, the tri-state area, we're almost at 50% of all deaths, 47% of all deaths, 36% of all cases. If we do instead, say, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, we're basically at 50% of all deaths in the U.S. in those three states. Now, some people are concerned why Florida and Texas and places like that are opening, and Georgia. Well, let's take a look at them. So, for instance, in terms of Texas is responsible for 3% of all cases, as is Florida, and Florida is responsible for 2% of all deaths, and Texas is 1.5% of all deaths. So they're not accounting for a lot of what we're seeing. Similarly, Georgia would be low. I didn't calculate theirs, but you can look at the data here. How many cases they have confirmed in the deaths. In terms of testing, the majority of testing seems to be done, 1,338,000 done. So they've done a lot of testing in New York State. Another place that's done a lot of testing is California. So we've had a lot of testing, whereas in the U.S. we've done 10 million altogether, 10,720,000 tests. So New York alone counts for 12.5% of all tests. New York and New Jersey, 16.8% of all tests. So they're doing a lot of testing in those areas. In terms of case fatality, I also calculated case fatality. So this is the probability of dying if one tests positive, right? So we take the confirmed cases, right? And you divide the deaths by the confirmed cases, right? So, and then I just multiply it by 100. So it's a probability of dying, and it seems to be pretty high in Michigan, followed by Connecticut, Louisiana, or actually New York. Then you go down to, say, Texas is pretty low at 2.8% out of these states that I've looked at. and Florida's about 4.3%, California's 4.1%. So if we use these numbers, we can actually do a good job in deciding when and where we should open first. In my opinion, based on reading these, there still are a lot of issues to deal with in places like New York, New Jersey. So I'd have a hard time believing that these areas should open up at this time, or at least have, just like open up without any severe restrictions. Whereas I can see why people in Texas and Florida and Georgia would want to open. So anyway, those are just some data for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something. Or thank you. Bye.